My name is John Dennehy. I'm a journalist at The National. We're hosting this event, and we're very excited and honoured to be joined by Thomas Blood, who is Sustainability Leader, Europe, Middle East, Africa for Amazon Web Services. So thank you very much, Thomas. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, John.
How does ESG, inform your work on it's a lofty goal to talk about it, but how does it inform your work on a day-to-day basis? I mean, is it something you think about, or is it something there in the background?
Well, it's both. So for me, obviously, I think about it all the time because that's my job now. And I've been thinking about it since the 80s. So anyway, I've been doing this a long time. But why? I mean, is it something that's passionate to you? What sparked that? Yeah, no. So I grew up in Germany in the 80s, and we had something that we were all concerned about when I was a teenager, which was acid rain. That was the thing back then, right? And it was basically changing. The emissions in the air were affecting the acidity of the rainwater, which is affecting soil health and plant health. So we had forests that were weakened and prone to disease. I grew up near the Black Forest, so I used to go hiking in the Black Forest, and then all of a sudden here are all these dead tree zones, basically turned a forest into a death zone. It was pretty awful. So all of us were talking about this in the 80s, and I went and got a degree in environmental science in the 80s when this wasn't really a thing. Not, people were talking about it, but it wasn't it doesn't have the attention that we have today. And I'm really happy now, fast forward to the day, to go, everyone is thinking about it, as everyone is talking about it. People want to take action. I shared before a quick conversation, an anecdote where I talked to CEOs and CIOs of large companies all over the world, and they are hearing it from their kids, and they're hearing it from their grandkids, and all of a sudden it becomes personal and challenging. And so everyone is really trying to think about what can we do? How can we accelerate the transformation that we're on?
So you've essentially seen that on the front lines many years ago, and that you're almost personally invested in it.
Yes.
So have you seen a change since those days?
100%. Yeah. So 30, 40 years ago, this was not a topic. Yeah. And now, in the boardroom, in the CEO suite, the executive teams, this is a topic. So for the first time in Europe, it's in the top 10 concerns of CEOs of companies. There's a survey on this from Gartner, and Gartner thinks that it's going to be a top 3 concern in the very near future. This happened 2 years ago. First time ever that sustainability became a boardroom topic, in the top 10 topic. And so now it's on the agenda. And so if I want to talk to a company about technology, and I also talk about sustainability, I have endless demand for these conversations.
I'm just fascinated as to how that process. We're slightly off topic, but it's okay.
Sorry.
It's how it becomes not niche, but not a priority to how it becomes to the top, top agenda in the boardroom. How does that happen? Is it almost like by osmosis? Is it media coverage? Is that something else?
No, I think it's a combination, right? So one, it's again, I said, the children and grandchildren are telling their parents, "What are you doing? How are you helping the planet?" And it's getting very personal. Right, so I hear this a lot, that the executives really didn't think about it before, and then all of a sudden their kids are asking them what are they doing in their business, and then they start thinking about it. So that's happening. Government regulation certainly has a big impact. Cost is another area. In Europe, when prices for energy started to increase 2 years ago or 3 years ago, all of a sudden, here's a great opportunity to think about how do I drive down my cost and have an impact on sustainability. I'll give you an example. We worked with Coca-Cola in Turkey. There's a bottling plant called İçecek. They wanted to look at the cost structure of the bottling plant. So they built on AWS a digital twin of the plant. So this is a representation of the plant. They simulated the optimal settings of this plant in the digital twin. They came up with a great set of conditions. They implemented them in the plant itself. By the way, this took 8 weeks to build the digital twin and another 8 weeks to figure out the optimal settings. So after 4 months of making these changes, after just understanding with the equipment they had, the plant they had, they just optimized it. They drove down the energy consumption by 20%.
Wow.
And water consumption by 9%. Wow. And they got additional 34 days of operations out of the plant because of better maintenance and fewer outages and things like that. So it started with cost, And then very quickly they realized, oh, there's also a great environmental benefit here. And there's a nice intersection there. And we tell our customers all the time, cost is a proxy for sustainability. So if you optimize for cost and you take the waste out of the system, you're also having a beneficial impact on the environment and on nature.
So it saves you money and is good for the planet.
Yeah.
Sounds like a win-win.
It's a win-win.
Okay, I want to come back to slightly to the topic, which is, is obviously, responsible technology. We know how much tech is part of our lives now. We all have to scan QR codes even coming in here this morning, So I just wanted to ask you if you could give some practical examples at Amazon Web Services, about how ESG is informing what you do.
Yeah. So again, we think of this very holistically. So it starts with the energy mix. So Amazon as a whole has a goal of being 100% renewable. And just think of the scale of Amazon globally. 100% renewable by 2030. We're on target to actually hit that in 2025. That means our data centers are running on renewable energy. We already have 19 regions, and a region is a cluster of zones, and the zones have multiple data centers in there. So we have 19 regions in the world are already running 100% renewable, which means if you're running workloads in the cloud, and if you're running workloads in those regions, you're getting the benefit of using renewable energy, which drives down your carbon. Currently, in Europe, if you run in the cloud compared to an average data center, you have an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions, roughly. Once we're at 100% renewable, it'll drop down to about 96%. And the remaining 4% are the embodied carbon in the building, right? It's the concrete, it's the steel, it's the racks and the technology that's in there that has embedded carbon in it. And so we're optimizing that as well. We think about this very deeply. So we have a requirement that we've implemented in the US, but we're going to implement globally, that says we want to use low carbon cement when we build new data centers. Take 20% out of the carbon out of the cement, or out of the processing of the cement rather. Same with steel. Instead of using coal furnaces to make steel, which is very carbon intensive, there's something called electric arc welding, where you can recycle old steel, which instead of throwing it in the dump, you can actually recycle this old steel and turn it into low carbon steel using electricity, using renewable energy. So, thinking through this holistically, you can really drive the efficiencies throughout the entire technology stack, and then our customers benefit from that when they use our technology.
What are the most challenging parts of the net zero target? What are the most difficult parts to reach that net zero? Are there any particular ones you could highlight?
Well, I think it's the energy mix, right? And I think that's why we're so keen to drive to 100% renewable. But the other piece, and maybe we should talk about this. The other piece is, it's not just driving for sustainable IT, but it's also driving for IT for sustainability. When you apply technology to these problems, what can you do there? And it's all about data in the end. We have to get much better at understanding the data that we have as customers. I talk to lots of companies that are still collecting their sustainability data in Excel spreadsheets, because that's what they've been doing, right? And they have staff that work on this. It takes them a long time to write their reports. These are data. We know how to do data. We've been doing data forever, right? And so can we find the data, ingest the data into a system, normalize the data, understand the data, make the data better, because right now the data is not that great in many organizations, and then apply machine learning, look for patterns, look for opportunities like the bottling plant did in Turkey, and then you already have the data anyway. Now you can report it in an automatic way. So instead of poring over things and working on these reports forever, you could just have an automated system that generates the reports that you need for coming regulations. So the heart of this problem for our customers is data. Let's find the data, let's aggregate it, let's analyze it. And then once you have the data, now you have an opportunity to find where you can get efficiencies out of the system with that data.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you about a particular project, which you'll explain better than I, but it's called Clean Rooms. So this is a really good example, I think, of what we're here to talk about. So if you could just explain what Clean Rooms is, please.
So one of the challenges we've heard from our customers, so one of the things that Amazon does is we're customer obsessed to the hilt, right? And so 90% of the technology, more than 90% of the technology we've built has come from customer demand. right? And the remaining 10% is we invent on behalf of customers, kind of thing, oh, what would help? So clean rooms was one of those questions we were getting. Companies have a challenge sharing data with each other, and sometimes it's proprietary data, sometimes it's just a sense of security, what happens to my data, what are they going to do with it? And so clean rooms is a way to help companies share data in a very structured way, in a private way, in a secure way, so that they can control who has access and what they do with it. So it's just a way to help communicate companies amongst each other. Clean rooms is a very nice example of using technology to solve these kinds of problems.
Fascinating. We've already touched on this, but as COP is going on, I think the environment aspect is really crucial right now. So I really just wanted to ask you, in terms of the environmental elements of EGS, could you outline how web services is applying that in a few other areas?
Yeah, let me give you my favorite example here is this. Have any of you been to London to the Natural History Museum? Is it magnificent or what? It's amazing, right? It's one of my favorite places. So the Natural History Museum London came to us and said, we want to build an urban nature environment to teach children about nature in the city. Because a lot of kids, they don't really know anything about nature in the city. So they came to us, we want to build this urban nature environment and learn and teach kids about nature. But what we found out is that they have 350 scientists who are focused on biodiversity. I didn't know that. And these scientists have 80 million artifacts that have been collected over 400 years in the museum, in the vault, that people don't see. So they're digitizing these artifacts. It's insects, it's leaves, it's plant matter, it's soil samples, and so on. They're tagging it, geotagging it to a map, so they see where it came from. Now there's a history of 400 years of the biosphere of England. When you have that, and we help them with machine learning to accelerate the identification of species and so on. But now you have this data, and you can actually overlay and say, okay, if I build a road here, I have a public works project here, what does that mean for the biosphere? What happens to the biodiversity of that place? I have the history, and then I can make predictions on what happens in the future. So all of a sudden, our urban nature project to teach children expanded and became this really magnificent thing to make this data available and publish it and share it with others globally to say, okay, here's a great way to think about biodiversity and protecting biodiversity. So we have great technical tools to really accelerate the agenda in every direction, whether it's water, energy, biodiversity, nature. There's lots and lots of things we should be doing that we can do with technology.
Is it hard to convince people still to use technology or use new ways of when you're used to doing something in a way you have done for 20 years, it's very difficult to change. I mean, do you encounter that a lot, or once people see the results, are they then think, oh, this is cool?
It's interesting. So when I was a customer of AWS, I worked at Experian and we went to the cloud. And the hardest part was not the technology of migrating to the cloud. The hardest part was the mind shift, the cultural changes that are required, because you have to work differently. The same is true for sustainability. The same is true for ESG. It's a mind shift, right? So the hard part is actually getting people, they all want to do it. There's no question about it. But like you said, there's habits, there's procedures, there's bureaucracy that has been established. All of those things have to be re-examined. And then you can, bureaucracy is good, it gives you guidelines, guardrails and guidelines, but is it still fit for purpose? And are things the way we've been doing them still fit for purpose? And I submit that they're not. If you hear what's happening here at the conference, I think what we need to do is re-examine collectively and our cultural aspects of how we think about nature, how we think about technology, and how we think about business in a way that we can align all of these different interests in a much different way and drive the change that has to happen.
So that change in mindset is almost more important than anything else. Interesting. I want to also move on to data privacy and cloud computing and this sort of topic. I mean, data privacy particularly is so important right now. There's just so much data. Every time you sign up to something, companies are asking for so much detail and your date of birth and all this kind of stuff. I just wanted to ask you how is how you see that, how important is ESG in data privacy, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. So our position again is we start with customer obsession, right? And our customers are telling us we want security, we want privacy, we want We want to make sure that the data stays our data and doesn't wind up somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So we bake that in, right? So our regions, basically, each region is geographically constrained to a country. And so we adhere to the laws of that country and make sure that the data stays in country. You can move it if you want to, but it always stays in the region, right? Unless you decide to move it yourself. We also make sure that data privacy is guaranteed in terms of, we don't have access to the data. We've actually gone as far as separating the communications protocols on our infrastructure. We have something called the Nitro chip. So we've taken the communications layer out of the compute layer. Sorry, I'm getting technical here. But basically, it makes it impossible to see the communications happening in the compute, just to isolate everything. And then everything's encrypted, end-to-end, all the time. We encrypt all of our communications through the systems, and we make it really easy for our customers to encrypt their data with their keys so that they have total control of what's happening to the data. So this is super, super important. And we put in, it's like with sustainability, right? We layer security into everything we do. And now we're layering sustainability into everything we do.
Even just generally, maybe not Amazon. Do you get the sense that companies are taking this seriously, data privacy? Do you think it is being taken up with utmost sincerity by companies?
Well, yeah, I think so. It depends, of course, where you're at, right, and what the local laws and regulations are. But to the extent as it's defined by law, we're hearing from our customers that they really care about this. And so we're doing our utmost to ensure that we can supply what they need in terms of security, privacy, and encryption technology, and so on.
Interesting. Okay, well, we are in Dubai in the UAE, so I wanted to talk to that for a bit. Regionally, is there anything different or unique about ESG and responsible tech on the ground here?
I don't live here, so I can't really tell you what's happening here. But I will tell you that there are regional differences for sure. There's one. Well, obviously, I live in Europe and I work in Europe and I'm responsible for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so the discussions we have here are much more advanced in terms of the thinking and in terms of the desire to move forward and in terms of the understanding of what's possible. Much different conversations than in other parts of the world, but that's changing as well. I've seen it change just in the last 3 years, where companies in Asia and companies in North America are beginning to really take this seriously as well. And you also see that reflected in law, right? So you have SB 253 and 261 in California, which is now driving change. So it's happening globally, but it's happening at a different pace where you're at. And of course, the topics are different. In Northern Europe, energy is everything. It's about heating and cooling, especially heating in the winter. But I think here it's probably all about water, right? So there are the regional importance we have to pay attention to. And oh, by the way, it's not all about carbon either. We should talk about nature. We should talk about air quality. We should talk about. I saw we have a health day at COP for the first time. So what are the implications and the connections between sustainability and health and medicine? Super interesting. So I think it's getting more nuanced and it's becoming more mainstream.
It's interesting you mention that because the COP, I was at COP last year, again off topic a little bit, but I was at COP last year and then COP this year. You're seeing like a much more broad conversation about the impact of climate change and warming temperatures on every aspect, from, as you just said, biodiversity, nature, and I had the first ever health day. So it does seem like it's becoming a much more broader sort of conversation about the impact on every part of our livelihoods. So
my personal vision for my teams, and we talk about this at work, is we would like it to not have to have a job for sustainability. Ideally, my job would just go away, because we would have sustainability normalized. It's just how you do business, right? It's just there. That's the vision I want to get to. I don't want to ever have to talk about this ever again. It's just how we do things.
So when you're out of a job, it's solved. The crisis is solved.
I will be sitting on the beach somewhere and having a great time. Maybe here in Dubai.
Okay, great. We're nearly out of time, but I want to ask you one final question, which again comes back to the topic. A very basic one. What is the impact of ESG on responsible technology?
So that's a basic question.
Can you answer that in one sentence?
Yeah, again, like I said, so for us, I mentioned earlier security. Security is part of everything we do. Sustainability is going to be part of everything we do. It has to be, right? So we have to think about impact on water. I'll give you another quick example. AWS has a water positive goal, which we set. We've been doing it for a while. We published it 2 years ago. Water positive means we want to return water back to the communities, more water than we consume in our daily operations. That sounds counterintuitive, but what we do is we look for opportunities to reuse harvested rainwater to cool our data centers, right? Or use recycled water to cool our data centers. And the water that comes out of the data centers, what can we do with it? Well, we can use it for irrigation in farming, right? So we give it to the communities that have farms that are adjacent to our areas so that they can reuse that water. We also look at, how can we optimize the cooling efficiency of our data centers, right? So depending on where you're at, in some parts of the world, you can use air cooling for most of the year, problem solved. In other areas, you have to use, HVAC and other systems, but the HVAC uses a lot of energy as well. So we've invested in new fans, again, very detailed, invested in new fans that have increased the flow of air, I think, by 50%. It's driving down our energy cost, and it's driving down CO2. So thinking about, how do we apply this everywhere we do all the time? I think that's the key here.
Fascinating conversation. Could go on for hours. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I just want to, say thank you very much, Thomas, for your time.
You, John.
Really interesting insights, and thank you everyone for coming to our Fireside Chat. Thank you very much. Thanks very much.